I'd like to introduce Dr. Lenny McDonald today. He lives in Mountainside, but he was born in Jamaica, the real Jamaica. And when he was a young boy, he moved to Jamaica, New York, in Queens. He received a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Syracuse University, and I know what you're thinking. Doesn't this guy know anyone that's not a chemist? And the answer is no. I married a chemist. My brother-in-law was a chemist before becoming a patent attorney, and my son is a chemical engineer. So, I'm limited in who I know. He graduated in 1983 and took a job with Bristol Myers Squibb as an associate, and he worked in the natural product area. And he loved it so much, he decided to go back to graduate school and received a PhD from the University of Utah in the medicinal chemistry department. And he learned how to isolate natural products and then characterize them and determine their structure. He then took a job at Wyeth, which was eventually consumed by Pfizer. And in 2014, he retired. Since that time, he's been actively learning to be a phenomenal photographer, as you'll see. A few years ago, he used to do some posting on Mountainside Matters, and I was considering, learning how to photograph macro insects. And he said to me, well, you need a camera, a short tripod, knee pads. I was starting to get a little concerned. And you had to wear old clothes because you're going to be getting down on the ground. At that point, I decided I would stick with landscape photography. Lenny has exhibited his work in a number of venues in New Jersey. And I believe last year he won the Union County first place for computer-generated art. And I'm sure we'll see a little bit of that today also. So Lenny?
Hopefully you can see that. Well, thank you very much, Matt, for that kind introduction. It's great to be here. Thanks everyone for allowing me to share a bit of my journey. So I'm going to be preemptive by saying that answering a question before asked, and the question might be, so where's your accent? You came from Jamaica, and I'm going to say, well, I lost it in a poker game. I've been waiting to use that for a very long time. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about my journey transitioning from science to photography. And a secondary title would be exploring creativity beyond retirement. And I think that's pretty crucial in terms of what this particular group does, allowing folks to continue to be creative and doing interesting things during retirement. Excellent. So today what I'd like to do is I'll give you a little bit about my background, and then in terms of what I did, and a little bit about the pathway that I took from science into photography. I'll tell you a little bit about the parallel between the two. There's similar methods that involve creativity. It involves experimentation, and I'll give you some examples of the type of photography that I like to do. I am a big fan of nature photography. I love macro, and I also do fine art photography, which covers everything. I was saying earlier to someone that I refuse to grow up. I refuse to pick a specific subject and stick with it. I love the art of photography, and I will keep doing that for the rest of my life. So I'll talk a little bit about the methodology, including some post-processing stuff. And finally, I'll talk about what Matt just alluded to, some computer-generated imagery, and talk a little bit about how the role that AI plays in my photography, and give my I guess, my interpretation of generative AI, which has become quite a controversial topic. And then I'll wrap up with some takeaways that I discovered during my journey. Okay, so beyond, let's talk about a little bit of background. As Matt said, I'm a retired chemist, worked for a number of years doing work and presenting slides like this, where I talk about natural products, I talk about the mechanism of action, and so for the next 45 minutes, I would have liked to talk about this, but I will not. I will only use this this one slide to really demonstrate. It's been a while since I've made a presentation like this, talking about the mechanism of action of the adduct formation and the quinone method mechanism. I don't miss going to conferences and talking about that. It is quite a transition to be able to go from that to essentially developing an increasing passion for photography and talking about photography. And I'm sure if while I was working as a chemist, someone took a photo of me, I would not be smiling like that. Now, that said, I do miss chemistry, but photography has become kind of a creative outlet, and I get a great deal of personal fulfillment by doing photography. So I love nature, as I mentioned earlier. This was taken in New Zealand. Matt and I were just talking about our mutual trips to New Zealand. Beautiful landscapes there. I love macro. It's one of my passions, so I'll talk a bit about that later. And then everything else, from architecture to cityscapes to abstractions. And then why not combine cityscapes with abstraction? Just have fun, right? That's what I do. So I mentioned self-taught, that I am self-taught. What does that mean? It means taking classes, workshops, critiques, and then joining groups that are essentially doing photography, meetup groups, camera clubs, some great camera clubs in this area. Camera Naturalist is one of the clubs that I belong to. They do only nature photography. Cranford Milburn Camera Club. These are all places that you can practice your art and interact with people. Learning from others, that's the big thing about these organizations. Learn by doing, taking creative chances, trial and error. That's really what it's all about in terms of being self-taught. The bottom line is you photograph anything and everything and do it a lot and do it for yourself. Do it for the experience, not for the critique. Yes, you do critique and you did get some feedback and you make some adjustments, but do it for yourself, and that's important. Okay, so I think I benefited tremendously from having a scientific background, and I noted that there are some parallels between methodology in science and methodology in photography. They both involve creativity, they both involve experimentation, observation, and then continuous development. That's something that is pretty critical when you're doing science, and it's equally critical when you're doing anything, actually. So one of the things that was very pleasurable to me is to note that the camera can actually be an instrument that sits at the intersection of art and science. And the example that I'm going to show, well, before I do that, let's talk about experimentation. I asked myself the question, if you see a dandelion in your yard, why not set it on fire and take a picture of it and share it with your neighbors because they'll appreciate the fact that, well, they don't have these dandelion seeds floating in their yard. So that falls under the category of experimentation. Observation. I mean, that's again part of the process, the shared process between science and photography, and then continued development, as I mentioned earlier. Try still life. Why not? This was taken during the pandemic when you really couldn't really do much. You can go outside into your yard, and I'll show you some results of that. But you stay inside, you can still practice your photography and enjoy. Anyway, so the camera at the intersection of science and art. I started taking pictures of smoke, and this is a photograph that you see here of smoke evolving from an incense stick in the dark. Set up your flash, you expose maybe about maybe 2 or 3 seconds. You set off the flash maybe 3 or 4 times, and you get an interesting photo. So the question is, so what's going on? It's a pretty picture. Well, I like it anyway. But I also realized that there's some science going on. And so the question is, what's going on? Well, light gets scattered, light of different size, particle of different size gets scattered differently, and it gives a variety of colors. And what I discovered when I started digging into this is that the really small particles, they tend to interact with light in such a way to give the blues and the indigos and the violet. Then you have the intermediate sized particles that give rise to some subtle colors. Now, we were talking a little bit earlier about Photoshop and post-processing. I'll get more into that, but the subtle colors here, what I have done is I have boosted them because I wanted to show you that there's so many interesting colors in the smoke, and I'm questioning, well, why is that? And of course, the Rayleigh scattering is the explanation for that. So with a larger particle, you just have essentially the light is interacting in a essentially it's just bouncing back white light. So that kind of explains what the reason for the various colors that you see when you're taking a photograph of just smoke coming from incense. And it sort of brought to me that the fact that, yeah, you can have a pretty picture, but there is a scientific explanation for it, and the left brain and the right brain are kind of collaborating and having a good time putting the two pieces together. Okay, so let's talk about creativity and experimentation in science. I'm going to read this to you because I think it's interesting. The really big problems in science are usually too difficult to solve directly, but creative thinking allows scientists to reimagine these complex problems and break them down into smaller, solvable parts. And that's where the expression, the art of the soluble by Peter Memoir, who is a Nobel Prize winner, the father of transplantation, talks about the art of the soluble. So the second bullet point says that scientists use creativity to determine which smaller question are likely to yield results and imagine possible answers to their questions and then devise ways to test those. So it's the questions or the hypotheses, designing the studies, and then doing the observation and deciding if the hypothesis is correct. And you know, this graphic shows essentially that, yeah, if you break a problem into smaller pieces, you can come up with some interesting solutions and essentially solve your entire problem. So an example would be, let's say, you're trying to optimize a yield or optimize recovery. You know, you're going to come up with a hypothesis in terms of, well, how do you do that? You have to do the experiment. Then you observe what's happening, do the analysis, come up with some conclusion, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, you do it again. So it's an iterative process. So this diagram essentially is just something pulled from the internet to try to show that experimentation is the way to go. Okay, so In terms of transitioning from science to photography, there are there are benefits, as I mentioned earlier, to having a scientific background. As a scientist, generally when you're working on a problem, no one has really worked on that specific problem before, so you are self-directed. So you understand the fundamentals because you've learned it, whether in graduate school or wherever. And so in photography, you're learning the fundamentals via courses, workshop, critiques, just joining various groups, interacting with people, and you do some creative experimentation. As I said, it's self-directed learning, trial and error learning, and then definitely the same process takes place when you're doing science. You really have to be self-directed in terms of figuring out, well, how do I get from point A to point B? How do I solve this problem? And I see that there are definite similarities between the two. So the slide is meant to show that, well, you're coming from a background in science, and myself in chemistry, and it's pretty solid, so you're coming from, kind of a solid foundation, and you're making the transition over into something that's art. And it's a little bit tenuous if you are anticipating making a living from photography. Maybe you should realize that it's not as a strong, how can I say, do it for the fun. How about that? That summarizes it. Do it for the fun of it. Just you hop from one to the other, land very briefly on those little branches, and then just keep moving and just enjoy it. So I do photography for the fun of it, just because it brings a great deal of satisfaction to me, and not necessarily doing it as a second career, although it does take up as much time. So what are some of the skills and tendencies that I brought, or you can bring from science? Well, curiosity, eagerness to learn, observational skills, attention to details, patience, persistence, being organized, analytical, etc., and collaborative. So this is a test for the audience. So I have 9 bullet points, and I have 9 pictures, and the pictures don't necessarily correspond to each bullet point, but I'm going to ask which picture correspond to the 2 bullet points that are highlighted, persistence and collaboration. And you can say top or middle, left, right. Anyone?
Middle left.
Middle left. The dragonfly, persistence, and collaboration. Anyone else?
The gulls on the center right.
Yes, that is it.
The sex scene.
Indeed. Okay, thank you for that. Doing photography, capturing the image, who, what, when, where, why, and how. So the when is retirement and needing to find new interest, and ultimately discovering that, I have been developing an appreciation for nature and wildlife, and as I mentioned earlier, a passion for photography in general, and that's been an important part of my life since retirement. So it allows me to remain creative and also to remain intellectually engaged. And I think how can I say, that is a crucial thing to be able to remain engaged. And I think many post-retirement activity is geared towards intellectual engagement, and it helps with our health and well-being. continued curiosity. What's this? It's just a piece of ice on ice. This was taken at where was it? Watchung Reservation. You take a picture, you look at it, you kind of figure out, well, okay, can I make this into something that tells an interesting story? For me, it's a pretty picture, but it gets me out there in the winter taking picture of ice on ice. New challenges. So I take a picture of a bubble on a pond, and I'm thinking, okay, so what can I do with this? Well, I can try to change this bubble and do a three-dimensional rendering. This is something that came from my scientific background, okay? So we've been doing that in the lab. So I'm doing this with photography. Again, trying to marry the two disciplines together. The bottom line is all of this is contributing to a great deal of personal fulfillment. So the fundamentals, and this is, and I have one single slide on fundamentals. If there's a great deal of interest afterwards, I have some backup slides. This can take hours to talk about, but the bottom line is, like in chemistry or in any field really, the fundamentals are the most crucial thing. Once you understand the fundamentals, you can do anything. I was saying earlier that most cameras are set up so that you can succeed. You can use it in automatic mode or semi-automatic mode, and you can take pretty decent pictures. However, once you understand the fundamentals, you can then take it a step further and become more creative. And that's pretty crucial. In terms of the fundamentals, all you're doing is, photography means painting with light. All you're doing is you're using light, right? And you have on your camera a light meter that tells you that this should be the exposure. There is only one exposure. Many people don't realize that there's one exposure because the light meter is saying there's this amount of light and you do whatever you want it to do. So you have the exposure triangle. You have three things to deal with. You have the shutter speed, you have the aperture, and you have the ISO. And you have to decide, what am I going to change? Which one am I going to change depending on the scene that you're looking at? If you're taking a picture of, let's say, this audience, everybody's sitting in one place and not moving, you're going to make choices about what the combination that you use. If you're taking a picture of a speed skater, you're going to make a different choice. But the exposure, the amount of light that's available, it's just the same. So that's all I'm going to say about the exposure triangle. Well, first, it's not a triangle, it's just these essentially these three things that you need to understand and make sure you make the right choice in terms of the scene that you're looking at. But again, I'll come back to that later if anyone is interested in the details of the exposure triangle and what the various settings could be. But I'm going to take you through some of my favorite types of photography, give you some examples. So I mentioned that I am a nature fine art photographer. I am drawn to nature. One of my favorite areas is to, I guess you can call it intimate nature. And if you look at the picture on the upper left, it's an insect. It's actually a water strider on top of water. Now, I'm really super impressed by anything that can walk on water. Now, what you'll notice also is that there is the pattern of the water is really incredible. So it's vibrating, and it seems like it's sending out two different sets of waves, one to the upper right and the other one to the lower left, and they're interacting, and you're looking at the interference pattern, and it's really, really fascinating. Again, there's a combination of science and art there. I see it as a pretty picture, but I'm sure some people will look at it and say, okay, well, I can calculate what's going on here. I would never do that, but It's just, it's pretty fascinating. So again, my favorite, it's nature, and I love intimate nature. The photos on the upper right, it's just a shot of sand, really, on the beach. You're looking down, and if you look closely enough, there are just these amazing patterns. The lower left, the picture in the lower left, also sand on the beach at a different time of the day. The waves are washing up, and then they're washing back out, and it's leaving this pattern. Now, if you're just looking at that, and this actually falls into the area of abstract, if you're looking at that only without context, for me, it's just, it's pretty fascinating to look at something like that. And, oftentimes you don't know exactly what you're looking at, but it has a certain visual appeal, at least to me. And then this one on the lower right, it's just a single blade of grass with, you can see some fine threads, and that's milkweed thistle. And the drops of water, this is after the rain, the drops of water are just adhering to the milkweed thistle. And again, that is something that's fascinating to me. So macro photography is one of my passion. You can do macro photography with a smartphone, you can do it with a point and shoot camera, or you can do it with an interchangeable lens camera. This is an example of doing macro photography with a smartphone. Believe it or not, this picture was taken at, Reeves Reed, Arboretum, and it was taken with this exact setup. What you see on the lower left is called an hollow clip, and it just clips onto the lens. And you can do wide angle, fisheye, but the most interesting part of it is to use those attachments to do macro. And I use the exact same setup, the hollow clip, with my iPhone 6S a number of years ago to take this picture. And it gives really great detail in terms of the fine detail that you see, not only on the flower, this is a salvia flower, but the water droplets also helps to amplify or magnify rather some of the fine detail. So yeah, you can do a lot even with a smartphone with the right attachment. What I actually use most of the time for macro photography is a setup like this. It's an interchangeable lens camera. In the upper left, you can see there's a so-called an extension tube. There's no element in there you can put your finger straight through. All it does is it goes between the camera and the lens, as you can see in the upper right, and it moves the lens away from the it essentially makes the image bigger on the sensor by moving the lens away a little bit from the sensor. And so it gives you sort of macro, but it's not exactly macro. You can also use a magnifier shown in the bottom. It's just like using a magnifying glass, and that gets you, very, very good macro. You can also spend a lot of money and get a dedicated macro lens. And as I mentioned, photography is very expensive, so you try some of the less expensive ways of doing macro. And so I primarily use extension tubes and using a magnifier. And I do have a dedicated macro lens, but I get excellent pictures just from using the others. And there's no reason why you cannot combine all of them, which gives you some incredible photos. Okay, so macro, what is it? And again, I'll read this. So by the original definition, a macro is a photograph. A macro photograph is one in which the size of the subject on the negative or the image sensor is life size or greater. The more important part is the second one, that in some sense, however, it refers to the finished photograph of a subject that is greater than life size. And that's important because you don't always have to have a macro lens to get an impactful photo. So Probably this is not the favorite insect in New Jersey or anywhere for that matter. Lanternfly, it's an invasive species, and a lot of people are not very happy to see it, but as a macro subject, it is fascinating. I mean, look at that handsome face. It's it's a pretty interesting subject, and I reiterate, it was not taken with a macro lens. I took it and I essentially zoomed in and I cropped in. So you again don't necessarily need a macro lens to get an impactful picture. But yeah, so larger than life I think is the definition that I like to think of when I think close-up photography. So yeah, discovering that there's some fascinating things in nature. This wildflower, or weed actually, it's no bigger than maybe my fingernail. But when you have a macro or close-up attachment, you can get some fascinating pictures, and you get to really look at some of the finer details. Bees, yes, you see them all the time. This is a bumblebee. You can really get in close and look at some of the details. Examine the macroscopic world. Even your breakfast, the fruit that you put on your breakfast cereal, why not? How many times do you look so closely at the fruits that you're having in the morning? So anything can be the subject of macro photography. There's intricate detail, hidden details. Looking at the eye of this dragonfly, I find it fascinating. Or looking at the wing of a grackle. Again, you can guess that this was not taken with a macro lens, but it is presented larger than life. And so, yeah, there's some fascinating detail when you start looking at close-up photos. In terms of subjects, you don't have to go far. You can find subjects in your houses, in your backyard, in parks, preserves, etc. And so there's no exotic gardens that's needed. If you look at this photograph, what you will see a mosquito, you'll see a sweat bee, a wasp, an ant, honeybee, bumblebee, a fly, hoverfly, and these are all on mint flower. I have a couple of pots, about this size, in my front yard where there's a lot of sun, and mint, if you let it grow a while, you get the flowers, and if you notice the substrate, it's all mint. And this was taken over the summer, but that's all you need to have a variety of subjects. The only one that was unwelcome is the one in the upper left, and that's the mosquito. It's there nevertheless. If it's there, I'm going to take a picture of it. Okay, so in terms of planning and preparation for photography, this slide, I think, tells it all. And it holds for not just taking a picture of insects, but it holds for taking a picture of any creature, whether it's an animal or human, and we are Homo sapiens after all. So yeah, make sure that you focus on the eye. The eye is really the visual anchor point. The second thing to notice about this picture is it's not just this hoverfly. It is the hoverfly doing something interesting. It's cleaning its proboscis. And that makes for a more interesting, engaging photograph when the animal is actually doing something. So again, I reiterate, in terms of planning, focus on the eye. And the other thing is to eliminate things in the background, trying to make it as impactful as possible. So in terms of additional planning and preparation, what you will notice is that studying your subject matter becomes important. Dragonflies, they tend to find a perch in the sun when they're hunting, and they tend to go back to that perch. So you'll see that the same perch is in the left panel and the right panel. And I'm interested in photographing, making an impactful photograph. In the panel on the left, the wings are in front of the eye, so I think it's okay picture, but I would rather get a better picture. So I keep focus on the perch. Other dragonflies come and they sit on the same perch, but eventually that same dragonfly comes back and sits on the perch, and I'm focused on the perch, and then I'm able to grab.
Dr. McDonald,
Yes.
you have more to go, or could you entertain questions?
I can entertain questions, and I can do a bit more if you wish.
We started a little bit late. We cheated you at the beginning. But we do need to finish up.
Yeah, I can go.
Do another 5 minutes and then have questions.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can. So let me just go towards the end. Just planning and preparation. You can go beyond nature. One of the things that you can do is, you can take pictures of let's say this goose. And I'm afraid you guys are missing some of it because it's not a goose. It's a mute swan pretending to be a silly goose, and I think this is pretty impactful. So understanding and really anticipating behavior of these mares. There was a stallion in the vicinity, and I think there was a discussion about who saw the stallion first. Creativity. You walk up to a scene and you say, I want to capture something that no one else has. So you're moving around the scene. You get a little bit closer, you change your setting, and then you say, well, that's okay, but it's not great. There are people in the scene. So then you try to get a little bit lower and change your setting again, making sure that you try to get something that's a bit more impactful. I'm going to run through these really quickly in terms of some of the principles that's involved with photography: simplicity, balance, proportion, clear center of interest. There's no question that the center of interest is this bud. Some of the principles involve rule of third, golden ratio, leading line, and I'll use, again, just stepping through, using some of these photos to show examples. Rule of third, putting the main subject right on the line of third, or putting the main subject, which is the sun in this case, on the center of the golden spiral. Looking at leading lines. Leading lines, you can see that the lines on the ground and the lines of the building lead to this structure right in the middle, which is the tallest structure in Iceland, Helgumskirkja. It's the smallest structure in this slide, but it's the biggest building, the tallest building in Iceland. So bottom line is you can definitely use some of these rules, these guidelines, and I'll skip through them. I think I didn't realize that the time was so short, and I'll go to the end, so just to do the wrap up. And I think just in terms of the wrap up, accurate portrayal in nature is important. However, you do have leeway to be a little bit creative. And that's the nature of fine art photography. You can push the colors a little bit, but you do have creative license to say, okay, well, I've got a nice picture of a bird. The background was my neighbor's house. Why not replace the background? But you got to make sure that you tell people what you're doing by putting, in this case, I put hashtags there. Or you're taking a picture of an egret with a lot of stuff in the foreground. Why not tell people what you're doing by using the word Adamski egret? And so it's important to make sure that you're telling people exactly what you're doing. And with that, I mean, I will, as I said, I can entertain some questions, but I'll stop there.
Can anyone with questions please come up to the front? Online? And online. And can you get us an...
Thank you for a fascinating talk, Lenny. Photography has been evolving for a long period of time. Today, we can take pictures of very small objects like atoms or even electrons, and very large objects like black holes. How do you see photography evolving in the coming years?
Excellent question. So, obviously photography has come a long way. I don't necessarily think that there's going to be any major changes. I think it's going to become easier and easier. I think it's going to involve a lot of AI. And in fact, there's a lot of AI built into our cameras right now. We don't call it AI, but you point even your cell phone, you point your cell phone and it puts a little square around the subject's face, or it puts a little square around the eye. And that's AI. And I think that's going to be the biggest change coming, is that photography is going to become easier and easier as time goes on. In terms of what's happening in terms, the atomic level, I'm not quite sure. It's been a while since I've been associated with that type of thing. So I hope that answers the question. Other questions?
Lenny, I concur with Al. It was wonderful talk, wonderful photographs. I learned a whole lot. So this is a follow-up actually to Al's talk and what you were just saying. I was going to ask you your opinion of iPhones, but sort of let's talk about current generation, because they've been getting smarter and smarter every year. Smartphones as cameras, it sounds like you're pretty positive about that, but also smartphones as a thing in the world and how that's affecting photography as an activity, because now everybody can point and click, and there's a lot of AI, and they're getting good photographs even though they don't know what they're doing, like me.
That's a good point. So the best camera is the one that you have in your pocket. Oh, it's always going to be the case. You don't need a sophisticated camera to get good pictures. And you're right, everyone can take pictures, and it's important when you're at an event, it's a family thing. It's about the memory. It's really not about the super high quality. If you're not going to print it and make it the size of the screen, you can take excellent photos with your iPhone. And I think the negative thing for a photographer, or those of us who call ourselves photographers and we want to show our images, maybe we want to sell our images, is that, well, everyone has a camera, and the value of a good photo, it's diminished because everyone can now take a good photo. The phones, and I think I said this earlier, the phones and the cameras, they are set up so that you can succeed at making a really good photo. So, and that's a good thing, because everyone can document their own lives, their memories, their families. So it's really a good thing to have. And I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of AI that's built into these phones and the new cameras. It's really incredible.
Thanks for a great presentation. I'm interested in your tactical steps regarding photography. You take creative shots. Do you essentially, take 30 shots of a picture or a scene and then boil it down to 1 and 2 that you're going to work with, then take it to Photoshop and alter the colors and crop it and things of that process, as opposed to the creativity? Thanks.
Yeah, so great question. And I do have like a few slides, but so I think whenever you put a picture out there, individuals will say, oh, that's a great picture, I really like it. not realizing that, oh, you're trying to get a picture of an eagle flying and catching a fish, and you're taking probably 30 pictures before you actually get that one where the eagle has its talon on the fish. So the answer is yes, you're taking a bunch of pictures and you're picking the one that you like. You're cropping out the things that are not part of the story, and that's perfectly fine. You are making sure that it's bright enough, because ultimately you're not just quote unquote taking a picture, you are making the picture, and you need to convey your own artistic style by keeping in the frame exactly what it is that made you press the shutter in the first place. You pressed it because you saw this eagle diving and you know that you want to get that decisive moment. And so, yeah, you throw away everything else because it's not important. You got the one where it's got the fish in its talon, and you're cropping it because, oh, maybe there's a boat over there in the water that it's not a part of the story, so you're cropping it, you're making it brighter, you're reducing the noise. So yes, there is a good deal of post-processing associated with any photography because you're making the photo. Ansel Adams, if he had the tools, the Lightroom, which is the standard, if he had Photoshop, he would be completely at home doing the post-processing, and that's a big part of photography.
Are you involved in photography clubs and big competitions in your entries?
So I am involved in photography clubs. I belong to Cranford Milburn Camera Club.
Okay, closer to the mic. I got one, folks.
Oh, okay.
Is that
So if you ask all your questions, okay. So I am involved in camera clubs. It's one of the main things that I love to do. It's not only learning part of it, but it's the collaboration, it's the camaraderie. Camera Club, Cranford Milburn Camera Club, Camera Naturalist, New Jersey Photography Forum, and I do enter into contests. It's an important part of developing as a photographer. Yes.
I'm a member of Morris Photocolor, but I'm sort of falling apart. You could probably see me staggering up to here, and haven't been able to do much for the last year or two. My impression with the photography clubs is that the judges are getting to be much more concerned about laws of how you put a photograph together rather than what impresses someone when they see it. So, for example, they will insist that when you enter a photograph in a competition that you have a border around it, because the border guides your eye and gives a better impression of it.
I completely understand where you're coming from. My perspective is this. The judge has perhaps a few seconds to look at a photo and come up with a score. So I think you have, I wear two hats. One hat is I want to be creative. The other hat is I want to make a photo and make sure I look all around the borders, make sure that my edges are okay, I don't have any extraneous objects in there. And those are the photos that I submit to, let's say, a camera club competition. But I also do my creative stuff. And then I don't really care what the judges think. But here's the thing, it's important because the judges, they're looking for certain things. They're not bad things. It's training you to think about the technical part of it. And once you get that done, you can just start working on the creative part of it. And that's a take-home message. When it comes to balancing technical with creativity, I say lean towards creativity, but make sure that, yeah, you get, you do the manual, look at your final photograph and get rid of those extraneous things, or maybe move a little bit to the side and make sure that when you take the picture, those are excluded, because the judge is going to see it and they're going to ding you for that. So there are pluses and minuses to what the judges are doing.
For example, I brought a photograph of a solar eclipse in Hawaii to a competition, and the judge's impression of it was, this isn't art. It's not a bird or a flower or whatever, and it's just an exercise in technology. So you're out.
Yeah, that can
Jeff, thank you very much.
that can be challenging. Yeah, I get it.
And last question. Thank you. And, one more online and one more. Herb?
Okay. Great talk. Now, or I'll have to go up. To go from the sublime to the absurd, I'm assembling historic family photographs, and they go back to my early childhood, and my brother had a Kodak Brownie camera. And I have two technical questions, well, one real. As I recall, the shutter was operated by a coiled piece of wire. But was there a lens, or did it have a pinhole? Do you know?
I'm afraid I am not familiar with that particular camera, so I can't answer that question.
It's like the Model T Ford. No, it was everywhere. Okay, well, thanks again for a great talk.
Do you still use film, or is everything you do digital?
So I am exclusively digital right now. I use film back in the day, and I actually gave away my film camera to someone who is a film enthusiast. I found that I wasn't using it as much, and I've switched completely to digital. I'm using a Sony mirrorless, and I find those cameras to be excellent. There was a discussion a long time ago, well, is digital ever going to replace film? Well, it definitely has, and I think you can, a lot of people still do film because they absolutely love it. I have found that digital satisfies my soul in terms of the quality that I get from digital photograph.
Thank you very, very much.
That's right.
It's a wonderful.
All right. All right. Thank you all.
We'd like to recognize you. Please stay. Two ways, one with a certificate and one with an old guard salute.
This is a certificate given to our lecturers, and it has an orchid here, recognizing the fact that Summit back in 1930, when we were, as we formed, was the orchid capital of the East Coast. And the second way we thank our speakers is the old guard.